Now I would invite Pastor Chris Christopher to the podium to share with us our first keynote address. Pastor Christopher serves as the pastor of Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Greenwood, South Carolina. He shares that he loves what he's doing, but that he's still not quite sure what he wants to be when he finishes growing up. Welcome, Pastor Christopher.
Thank you, Bishop Jenny. And thank you, South Carolina Synod, for coming together in this spirit of love and cooperation. I want to, first of all, Bishop Jenny, I want to thank you and the council for the Lifeline Fund. I'm a recipient of one of those scholarships, of one of those debt repayments. And it started in 1994, and I was still paying because I was on an income contingent plan. Miss Dixie Norris told me no one ever was turned away from seminary because of money, but she did not tell me it was because student loans would cover it. I also want to thank Neil Fisher. Neil, at the last moment, 2 years running now, as I've been invited here, has at the last minute put stuff together for me, for you. Because as my team here will acknowledge, timeliness, that's why I haven't nominated anybody. Timeliness is not one of my strengths. It's not a spiritual gift for me. But I've been invited here today to talk about seeing Jesus in unexpected places. I never would have thought about a trailer park in Gainesville, Georgia. But here in the South, we do honor the people who are different. I'm not sure who said it, but here in the South, we put our crazy on the front porch. We are not ashamed of our people who are different. However, when it comes to how we look at Scripture, that's a whole different story. I want to ask you a question. Were there any weeds in the Garden of Eden? How do you know? What's the definition of a weed?
Something that grows out of place.
It's a plant that grows where you don't want it to grow. It could be the most beautiful rose bush, but if it's growing in the middle of the driveway, it's a weed. In the Garden of Eden, God didn't make any weeds. But then all of a sudden there were. Because we started looking at things differently. We started understanding some things were good and some things were bad. And what has become of that over the ages is that we, as church people, have become those people who consider ourselves the expert gardeners. We know what is right. We know what is good. We know what the gardening manual tells us. And that's bad, or that's wrong. And we wonder why our churches are declining in its enrollment, and its membership, and its participation. Well, it's pretty plain to see that the devil don't have to visit the church anymore. We do a pretty good job of excluding ourselves. But I want to tell you, there is hope, because God is still bringing babies to be baptized. When I first came to Greenwood, to Emmanuel, I told my folks, I said, you want to grow a congregation? Here's the deal. You hear a baby crying during church, if you turn around and scowl at that family, you're going to have to answer to me. Because, you see, babies are a sign of hope for the church. It's a sign of life, not for the future, but for today. And have you ever seen anybody, but, well, I can name a few, that didn't like to see a new baby and watch them take their first steps coming up the aisle for children's sermon? I mean, it's a great, great feeling to see that. And so one of the places I want to tell you to find Jesus in unexpected places is right in church. Right in church. We find what we're looking for. Now, what did I do with that? Blasted. There it is. Neil, what's my target? Oh, the forward button. I didn't do the training. There we go. So we all know this. It's called not the Great Commission, but the Great Compassion. No, that's not what it's called. But anyway, you know this passage, right? And then the righteous will answer Jesus. Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry, gave you food, thirsty, and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick, in prison, and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. To me. You know, we know that passage, and we know what we're supposed to do with it, but it's awfully frightening. It's frightening. Because when we do this, when we step out of our Lutheran bubbles, we move into places where love takes things out of control. Love is a very fearful thing because we can't control it. We can't control God's love. The church is always at a fork in the road, deciding on what we will be, who we will be here for, what is our mission. We are always at a fork in the road, and Emmanuel in Greenwood is literally at a fork in the road. The road comes straight down from United Ways in a neighborhood that's changed over the years. And if you go, the church sits in the fork. If you go left, you're in housing that is poor. Most of it's rental. Most of it's African American. But if you go right, you are in the old money Greenwood with mansions. 6- and 7-figure households. Literally, that's where we are. Over the years, Emmanuel has struggled with, do we move or do we stay? But I have to tell you, the heart of that congregation is to stay in that neighborhood and to be the church in the midst of that. Yes, ma'am. Tell us, sister. Brennan Manning. And anyone ever heard of the Ragamuffin Gospel? Brennan Manning is a Roman Catholic priest, or was. He just passed away. Roman Catholic priest who is in recovery. He was an alcoholic. And he was very much into, he's from New Orleans, and he's very much into how the church interacts with the world. The greatest need for our time is for the church to be what it has seldom been. Loving others regardless of religion or culture, pouring itself out in a life of service, offering hope. We are in that business. We are people of the resurrection. And that's what we do. That is our gift to our community. Offering hope to a frightened world. And boy, if you're not scared in these days, then you haven't been watching the news and you are smarter than I am. And presenting itself as a real alternative to the existing arrangement. Now just think about it. And so we go to looking for these Jesus in these different places. Who is my neighbor? And you know that story from Luke 10, the Good Samaritan. Well, I think we could call it the good foreigner. The good resident alien among us. Documented or not. I doubt the Good Samaritan was documented. But who is it that stops to do something, to help someone in need? It is this good-hearted person. And all the church people walked on by. But this foreigner, this one who was accused of by the people there where this happened, of being a heretic, of being an idol worshiper, of being something false to their religion. This is who stops. And so I want to take a break here, give you guys a respite from me, and I want you to hear about one of the ministries that we've started this year. It's completely lay-led. And so, pastors, I want to tell you something I've learned over 29 years. Get out of the way. You don't have to have your hand on the button for everything. Your foot doesn't have to be on the gas for anything. If you've got to do that, it doesn't need to be done. But there, the Spirit is alive and well in our congregations. And so, step back and give permission. But it's not within our mission statement. Change your mission statement to incorporate what the gospel is all about. I want you to hear about a brand new ministry led by these two gentlemen.
So this is Pastor Will. I'm Pastor John. Will is a sheriff's deputy in Greenwood County. Our sheriff has blessed us that we're able to go in to the jail every week. Since that time, we baptized 39 men. One of my first visits, there was an inmate. As soon as he saw Will walk in with his uniform on, you could see the hatred come on his face. Before he left that night, he was hugging Will. A week ago, he was sentenced to the penitentiary for a very short period of time. The night before he left, he had communion with Will and I. During that time, it was a special bonding time between us. Not only during his service in the Greenwood County Detention Center had he begun to build Bible studies for his fellow inmates at night. During that time also, he also had baptized believers. That's God's calling to us. When we go in that jail, it is hard to believe. We don't know what to expect. Sure, we were fearful. I was especially. Will's been in there working for many years. We didn't know if we were going to have the words to say, but I'll put it this way. Every time we go in, it takes us at least 48 hours to actually gather what the Holy Spirit has shown us in the jail time. We've had men who've gone in there and says, we've never been welcome in a church before. We have a relationship is homeless people, people who've been locked up, people who were on the streets, and people who are addicts. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you really quick that our prison system and our jail systems does a very hard job at reforming inmates. Because a lot of them who are in there are simply in there to simply dry themselves up, sober themselves up, and then they're thrown right back on the streets again. What hope do they have? We're trying to give them hope. Will everything that we do in that jail prosper? I think it's the same as the parable of seeds. Some of those seeds don't sprout immediately. Some will take time, and that's in God's time. And we firmly believe that the Holy Spirit guides us on a weekly basis to see what we have present. One of our inmates shared with us a couple of weeks ago. My mom started shooting me up when I was 14 years old. But you know what? I know where your church is. Because I lived in the woods behind your church from age 11 to age 15. And I know where your soup kitchen is because that was the only hot meal we got. This is seeing God in different places. Will, I'm dominating. I want you to talk.
Well, usually you can't shut me up, so I just want to say, really, I was sitting in a sermon with Pastor Chris, and we had a pretty bad incident that I was involved in. Had a huge gang riot in town, and we sat there and talked about how can we be part of the solution and not part of the problem. If all you want to do is complain about what's wrong with your community, you're not willing to get out there and make a positive change, then we're not really doing anything. And what the prison ministry, I really started going by myself at first, and I was overwhelmed. I worked back there. I've worked there for 19 years. But when you go in and you're holding a Bible, may sound easy, but you're looking at people who usually had an adversarial relationship with somebody who looked and dressed like me. But quickly, very quickly, I learned that if you spread the love of the Holy Spirit, it will come back on you tenfold. And I can just say these men, they've changed my life. They continue to change my life. They actually have these little things called chirpers, and they have these little devices that look pretty much like what you're voting on today. And they can text where it's a channel where the jail can still read it if they make threats to people or something. But it's a way to communicate cheaply because phone calls is over $1 a minute. So most of those people in there are addicts and people that don't have the money to do it. So they started texting. We have a text group. The guy he was talking about just got sentenced to prison, sent me a long text the night before he went away. And I tell them all the time when I go back there, they're touching our lives. I know they're touching his because if for some reason I say I can't go on Thursday nights, whatever excuse I had, he ain't going to accept it, so I'm going to be there. This is my accountability buddy right here. And I'll just say, sometimes just know this, that doing God's work isn't always going to be comfortable. It's not always going to be preaching to the sanctified sitting in church pews. It may be on a street corner. It may be at a food ministry. It may be at a school. You never know where it's going to be. I certainly would have never thought a couple years ago that it would be in our county jail. But with me, definitely with me. He and I have a long story we don't have time to go into that brought me into the Lutheran Church. But it has been a blessing in my life, and the relationships that I'm building with these guys has helped me. It opens your mind a little bit when you start to see somebody as a human instead of the sum of their sins. And
last but not least, and I'll hush, when we go in each week, we don't go looking in the paper. We don't go looking online to see what they're locked up for. And I think this is what they appreciate more than anything. We go in there and we know they're God's children. And when we look at them as God's children, our attitudes change. And when we see people out there on the streets, anywhere else, we should see them as God's child.
You'd never guess John, lifelong Lutheran, Will was Southern Baptist. And I'll tell you, you can find Jesus in the Baptist church too.
on the back row.
But this ministry has brought some of those who have been released onto the back row of our church on Sunday morning. They're there once, they're there half a dozen times, and then we don't see them. We can't keep up with them. Because a lot of them are in transitional life. But they're there. And whether it's there to worship the Lord or whether it's there to tell Will and John thank you. We don't know. But we give thanks to God that they're there. So. Now, who is my neighbor? Well, for people of faith, I'm missing something. Go back. There we go. Yep. Ministry with those in addiction. Last year I stood before you and showed you a wonderful video about a new ministry called Restoration Chapel. And this, we have had more comments about this young lady's testimony for that. Now, Restoration Chapel has done a good job. Keynote Manor, the recovery program that operates there, has done a phenomenal job. They've had 35 women come through the program. 10 of them actually completed the program. Some of them were asked to leave because they started using again. That's part of the nature. And that's part of the nature of jail ministry. We let them out into the same environment that put them in there in the first place. So we as a church, we have a calling, not just to put on a Band-Aid, but to do heart surgery. We're called to do this because we are the children of God. No, we are the body of Christ serving the children of God. South Carolina has some alarming statistics. I'm not going to read them. Check them out. It's scary. And that's pre-pandemic. Now, can you imagine how those numbers have skyrocketed over the pandemic? So for people of faith in this type of ministry, it's a perfect place for us to work, because if you went to church, and most of these ladies at Restoration Chapel have a life in church, but when they started using, they were shamed. And they felt disgraced. And they've walked away from church. They've walked away from their walk with Christ. We can do that in church, can't we? For people who are simul ustis et peccator, we like to be simul ustis a whole lot more. Saint. We like to do that more. We like to find the difference, the others. Am I running out of time?
You're okay.
Okay.
Preach.
My wife usually sits out here and does this. And so,
What is your congregation?
you gotta love him. Jesus said so. That's what keeps us from doing prison ministry from the inside. So for people of faith, we have a job. Restoration Chapel, 35 have started, 35 been in the program, 10 have completed. We've done 12 baptisms there. And Pastor Bishop Jenny, pay no attention to the baptisms and communion that they have done. Just forget they ever said it, because forgiveness is of God. Doesn't fit with Luther, but we're not making Lutherans, we're making Christians. The thing that's working at Keynote Manor and Restoration Chapel is flexibility in the program. They are forever in flux. It's a dynamic. All the ladies have to get a job. And when you're working, you're at the scheduling of your supervisor. So sometimes they're working on Sundays. Sometimes they're working on Wednesdays. Sometimes they can't be there at all. And so it's been difficult for us to get a pattern. But what we've been doing the last 6 weeks is something that we started doing early, and then it got discombobulated because of scheduling. But the last 6 weeks, we've been having table talk. And we've sat down and had dinner together. And I'd ask them to take a slip of paper and write a question or a topic that they want to talk about. And we'd fold it up, and they would pick it out, and I would usually blush. And I'm a Marine. But we would talk about Well, Pastor, what does the church think about having sex when you're already married to somebody else? Pass the potatoes, please. But they're looking for, Aretha Franklin sang it well. R-A-S-P-E-C-T. Find out what it means to me. That's all these ladies are looking for, is to be seen as a human being, not as a piece of trash, not as someone broken. The church can do that. We can do that. We are in bondage to
Sin.
We are addicted to, oh, come on. We are in bondage to sin. And we cannot free ourselves. We are addicted to sin, and we cannot free ourselves. Who freed us? Jesus. And we keep going back, don't we? They're no different than we are. We're no different than they are. I looked at Mike Shackelford. Mike said, I got 8 slides. How many do you have? I said, 33. He said, I'll stand up and do this. I said, I can't see that far. I just want to, these are some of our graduates. Nika, Tiffany, and Raven. Selena, and and then Janae. It's a wonderful. They go to church at a contemporary church because we are too slow. But they also grew up in a rule-oriented religion. You come to a Lutheran church, only rules we have are don't break in line in communion. And don't make me miss kickoff, Pastor. So, pretty much the only rules we got, right? And so, they go to what's comfortable, but when they have problems, they come to us. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So, why should we as the church become engaged? You will be surprised. If you did an anonymous survey in your congregation, you would be surprised how many people how many families in your congregation have people in their lives that have been affected by addiction to drugs or alcohol. Or maybe you wouldn't be surprised. But we are the place. We are the place. It's the scourge of our times, their challenge and ours. What do we do next? We dry them out. We preach to them in jail. We baptize them. We love them. We bring them devotionals. We have Bible studies. And then they're back out on the street. What's next? That's the missing part. And so, you remember the opioid lawsuit? And all the states got a huge gobs of money. Well, our state has a department called DEODIS, and it actually got some, and its primary mission is to help faith-based ministries deal in recovery. DEODIS. And so Lutheran Services started a program called Trinity Recovery, and they have an office here in Columbia, and they have an office now in Greenwood at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. And they are a resource for the community, bringing information, networking, resources, some funding to help people. And so they come and they teach, they help. One of the things that we've been talking about is how can we help congregations become more aware? And so what we're talking about, who knows what RIC is in the ELCA? Reconciling in Christ. It's kind of a certification process. It's a learning process about how do we understand homosexuality and all of the other expressions. Well, we started talking, why don't we do something like that about addiction? Why don't we create a program to help congregations deal with the reality of addiction in their church families and in their communities? And so, a recovery, we haven't gotten our acronym yet because it's a pilot program with two of us. But recovery-friendly congregations are aware and informed, they're non-judgmental, and are welcoming and compassionate. Now, here's the information on Trinity Recovery. I have a last night at 7 o'clock, I remembered I was supposed to have a takeaway. Well, last night at 7:30, I started working on it. And so I've got something, but I didn't do it in time to get it to the committee to approve it, to put it out. So if you want one, it's got some information, particularly this, on on who to contact. I'll have it at my table over there. So if you want one, just come by. All right. Anybody ever heard of Brother Lawrence? Brother Lawrence was he was not a Catholic priest. He was a monk, and he wrote a little book called "Practicing the Presence of God." It's a beautiful little book. It's about like this, about 20 pages, 30 pages. And one of the things that he talks about, his job at the monastery was washing dishes and making beds. And he resented it at first, probably like I would. But I've learned to love washing dishes. You know why? Because I can finish it. Ministry's not like that, is it, pastors? He wrote in his book, we ought to not be weary of doing little things for the love of God, who regards not the greatness of the work, but the love with which it is performed. He would imagine, as he's washing dishes, the person who would be eating off that plate at dinner tonight. When he would go and clean someone's room, he imagined that it wouldn't be so bad for them as they're saying their prayers that night. Could we not think about how we approach life in such a way? At Emmanuel, we have a soup kitchen, and I'm not going to bore you with all statistics because I've been going on a long time, but we've been doing it a while. That's Mr. Jackson. He's one of our soup kitchen recipients. We've been doing this for 23 years, every Sunday. Our numbers last November were about 95 to 100 a Sunday. Since post-Christmas this year, it's been 140 to 170. And with the food programs being cut, we anticipate it growing even more. This fellow right here, he's a member at Emmanuel, but he never comes to church except for beer and hymns. Yeah, now his mama was the pillar of the church, but Rock, he comes 2 or 3 Sundays a month to wash dishes because this is how he lives his faith. This is Miss Emma, and she's one of our food bank recipients. 2 days a week, we have a food bank where people can come and get food once a month. Canned food. We have deliveries every day from grocery stores that donate. So we get fresh produce, we get meat, and we get a lot of sweets. There is a reason that we are a diabetic nation. Diabetes is going to kill us. But we give this out. And they can take as much bread as they want because we get that much bread. And so we give them that. And they can come once a month. A Mormon church in Greenville needed to close their food bank. And so they called United Way and said, who can we donate this to? We were the recipient of 2 tons of canned food. That is the necessary ministry of our times as well. Mr. Larry and Miss Penny, they are not married. They wanted me to make sure you knew that. But they are at the church. Larry is there every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And he never misses church. He's there, he's the grunt. He carries it. And he and another fella in his 70s as well, for these folks at the food bank, they carry the groceries out for them. Put it in their car. Shake their hand. Call them by name. It's a beautiful thing to witness. It's the little thing. That's Rodney and me. Oh, and that's Miss Cheryl. Just some recipients of our food bank. Now, here's the fun part. Jesus outside the box. What's he doing? He's texting. He's looking at his cell phone and he's laughing, right? Well, this is why. Ministry is dangerous. Now, I was talking to Rick Carter the other day, and I told him about it. He said, man, you got to have a good story to go with that if you're going to put it on the slideshow. I said, well, how about this? How about, now my church council knows who's in charge. But I decided not to do that because John is my president, right? So ministry is dangerous. Kindred Manor Restoration Chapel is in a dangerous neighborhood. It is filled with drugs. It's filled with gang violence. And they're there. What's the date? A week ago last night, I was going over for dinner, and I got out of my car, I stepped off the edge of the sidewalk, and my face and the sidewalk had a come to Jesus meeting. But you should see that sidewalk by the time I got through. Now, when I went to the hospital, because they insisted I go, I went to the hospital, and when I got in there, I'm registered in the emergency room by Miss Nika, the first woman we saw, the first picture we saw from Restoration Chapel, the first graduate. She is who, Pastor Chris, what did you, what? You know. But then as soon as I'm coming out, the triage nurse was Deacon Stacy Setzer, a deacon of our Synod. And her ministry is working the emergency room at Self Hospital. So there were two miracles that night. Number one, my beautiful face did not get destroyed. But Moses parted the Red Sea, and I was in the emergency room. I was checked in at 5:40, and I was at home by 7:15. That's a miracle. They did find a brain. When they did the CAT scan, my wife asked me why I don't use it more often. Let's see. But ministry is dangerous. Now, this has kind of gone out of vogue with a lot of pastors. My first 15 years of ministry, I didn't wear them because I didn't need anybody to know that I was a pastor. I wanted them to think that I wasn't a pastor and then be surprised when they found out. Well, that didn't turn out so well sometimes. But when I went to New Orleans, I spent the last 10 years there before I came here. In New Orleans, it's a Catholic city. And so I found out that if I wore this, they thought I was Catholic. Pretty cool. And once a month, I would get on a streetcar, which was near my church, and I would ride it from the end stop where I was to the other end, which is on the Mississippi River. And it was amazing how many people would come and say, hey, Father, what's the Pope doing? He's a Jesuit. He could be Lutheran, you know. And we would have these great conversations about God and the church. Amazing what these things nowadays allow us to do. It's not that free cup of coffee at the hospital anymore. It's the conversations that it invites. We started campus ministry at Lander University this year. It's amazing how many of the students don't know what this is. It's amazing, even in a Lutheran state. So it's wonderful, the conversations that this allows. Now, the reason I do wear it is just to remind me who I work with. It reminds me how to act. So, speaking of how to act, the church has become involved in politics for a long time, and it's been nasty and divisive. The church has been involved in right and wrong for a long time. In 2009, after the sexuality vote at National Assembly, the sex war in North Carolina started, where I was called. And it was mean. It was mean. People who had been sitting beside each other 20, 30, 40, 50 years are now enemies and won't even speak to each other. We're seeing it happening here in South Carolina now. Why? Church is that place where the dignity of each person should be recognized, and where each of us should respect each other and give each other the dignity of their own opinion and their own thought, whether we agree or not. But do it in a way so when we walk to communion, we can do it arm in arm. Because if we're not doing that in the church, we are not the church. If we can't disagree and still love each other, we are not the church. We are a political party. So wear it. Be that way. Okay. Thank you for that smattering. Now, to build community around our church, I walk. Remember that old adage, management by walking? You walk around the factory floor and you see what's going on. Well, I walk around the neighborhood and I wave and smile at cars, and they wave back. And now they're waving back. They're waving at me first. You know, it's hard not to smile when you wave at someone. It changes things. These little things that we can do, this is one thing you can go back to your congregation and say, hey, smile. In my first church in North Carolina, we were prayer covenant partners with the big Catholic church downtown. And we had an old Jesuit priest who was my partner and spiritual director. We did a pulpit swap the week before Reformation. I preached to his 1,000 Catholics. He preached to my 120 Lutherans. And he came walking in, and he said, into my church. I wasn't there. And he came walking in. He said, am I in the right church? Yeah. Is this a Mighty Fortress Lutheran Church? Yeah. Well, why the hell are you not smiling? You're Lutherans. You have grace. We're Catholics. We got rules. But yes, why do we not smile more? Luther wasn't serious. He was crazy. And so, folks, wear a smile to church. Wear a smile to church. Smile at those babies that come in. They're a gift from God. Smile at those old people who are there, who don't have much to put in the plate, but they're there every Sunday. Smile. And you'll see Jesus in places you never, ever expect. Invisible people. I know I'm going on. Wrap it up. I'm with you. Invisible people. Drive-throughs, cashiers. You ever seen anybody at the drive-through or a cashier get berated by somebody?
Yes.
That's just mean. I don't care. They might be having a bad day. Be kind to them. I got more to say, but I won't. Servers at a restaurant. Your steak is tough. She didn't cook it. She didn't kill the cow. Be kind. Leave her a tip. Our neighbor's faith. In New Orleans, there's two things I want to share quickly. The first one is racial reconciliation workshops. There was an African-American Lutheran church in New Orleans, the oldest one in the country, Bethlehem Lutheran Church. And they hosted a series of racial reconciliation workshops. Phenomenal. That's something we need to do. That's something we need to do. At my church in New Orleans, Grace Lutheran, the one that was 8 feet underwater after Katrina, we held Lutheran Muslim table talks. You know those despised people in our culture because they are going to bomb everybody and they're all terrorists and they're mean and they're, no. We became friends. We had 30 from our congregation, 30 from theirs. We sat at tables and we talked about not our religion, because we weren't there to convert them and they weren't there to convert us. We were there to talk about life. And what each side recognized and learned is that we're both humans.
Amen.
We both have hopes and dreams. And we both want to serve the God that we believe created. We got a lot in common. When the pandemic hit, we had 12 shut-ins at Grace. We had 12 shut-ins. Jenny, wife of the imam, they come to our church after what they thought was our worship service, but we were closed, and brought 12 bouquets of fresh flowers for our shut-in. Now, you talk about a people of heart. We need to get to know our neighbor. I think this is it. Disaster prepare. I know. What time's worship? Now? I'm trying. 72-hour Lutheran. We have hurricanes. We got more coming. There it is. My mama always told me, it's difficult to find something you're not looking. If you're not looking for Jesus in the world as you go out, you will not find Jesus in the world. Turn off Fox News, turn off MSNBC, and turn on the smile and the love that God has poured into your life. And you will find Jesus in all kinds of places.